Well, we're hoping to maybe explore some possible answers to some of those questions that Katie just raised. Joining us now for more is Bob Kunkel. He joins us from Connecticut today. He is the president of Alternative Marine Technologies. It's a shipbuilding and design firm. So, Bob, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So I'm hoping that we can dig into some of what my colleague Katie was just talking about there, some of these possible things that officials are now going to be looking at, investigators might be looking at. Based on your experience here, Bob, and what we are seeing in this video, of course, that video, the moment of impact, which we are going to show, I'm hoping that we can talk about that video. What is it that you think we are dealing with here?
Well, in an incident like this, let's remember the first thing that's important is for us to continue to search and rescue and find the 6 workers that are still missing. So, in any accident in shipping, life is the most important thing that we try to preserve here. So it's good to hear that the crew is safe, that there was nobody injured in the collision from the crew. And we have to understand that there'll be, full NTSB investigation, full Coast Guard investigation. And from what we saw, in the early morning when the video started to come out, and it's certainly an overwhelming, video seeing a full bridge collapse the way that it did. But you saw a couple puffs of smoke, some flickering of lights, which indicated a power issue on the boat and an eventual or an assumption of an eventual loss of propulsion. The fact that a Mayday call was made brings to the point that the crew was capable. They're certified. It's a Singapore flag ship. Singapore is a very distinct flag organization that has takes their involvement very seriously. The ship is managed by a company called Synergy in Singapore, which we know who is a very well-run organization on that end. So it looks like a loss of power. And when a loss of power like that occurs on a ship of this size, it's very difficult to keep it under control.
Would backup generators have been in play here? And if so, why, in your view, would that not have been enough to restore power in time to avoid the bridge?
In every ship construction, there's installed what is called an emergency generator. So if the generators that are supplying power to the ship on a daily basis, normally 3 units are installed in a machinery space. If there's any kind of issue with those generators that would create a loss of power and a blackout, the emergency generator is set up to immediately start and provide emergency power, which would include lighting and systems that would assist in correcting any issue or helping to solve more control on the boat. So one of the things that I believe NTSB will look at is how the Mayday call was made. Was it made by a walkie-talkie, or was it made by a VHF radio that was on the bridge, which would indicate that some type of emergency power may have taken over if the bridge was still operable. But like I said, without propulsion, without an astern engine, difficult for that ship to not just make its way to where it's going to go.
Can you talk to us here, Bob, about what this process of leaving the Baltimore harbor would usually look like? What would be the role of a pilot? What would be the role of a tugboat? What is the difference between those 2 roles as well? What should this process typically look like for a ship that size to get out of the Baltimore harbor?
So the navigational charts and AIS information that we've seen indicates that it was a very normal departure. So in every port around the world, there is a pilotage requirement. The pilot is brought aboard to assist the captain with local knowledge to understand how the channel operates and how the port operates. He is on the bridge during the departure. The tugboat company was McAllister, another well-known industry representative here in the United States and many of the ports. 2 tugs were involved. Lines are given to the ship and the tug to assist it coming away from the dock so that there's no damage to the dock. And the ship is taken away from the dock and put in a position where it can use its engines to continue to voyage and depart. And it, again, everything that we've seen on this, it was a normal departure. The tugs were released as she started to make her turn into the channel, and there was nothing abnormal at that point in time as she started to make her way into the channel.
So the pilot almost, it sounds like, acts as a bit of a shepherd guiding a flock of sheep, and then you have those tugboats which are going to guide it through. Would it not be possible for those tugboats to perhaps steer a ship that size out of the way, or is it just simply way too big, way too heavy?
No, the tugs have the capability to control the vessel. I mean, they're controlling the vessel, at the dock where you're trying to make sure you're not damaging the dock or hitting the dock or anything. So they have the power to control the vessel coming, away from that dock. But they're not, once that part of the job is done, they're released. And it's the pilot and the captain that give them that order that everything was under a normal condition, and they released the tugs, and she continues on her way.
What about the speed? Because we've heard from the governor that the ship was traveling at about 8 knots or 9 miles an hour. Is that pretty normal for how fast a ship that size should be going as it departs the harbor?
A lot of that is dependent on weather conditions and current, because the speed of the ship has to be above whatever the current is in the harbor. So if the tide was coming out or going in, is going to affect the speed of the ship. And again, the pilot has control of that from the bridge to be able to tell the vessel and the crew on board what speed he wants, whether it's slow ahead or dead slow ahead or astern. So again, 8 knots, not particularly fast for that size vessel, but again, we would assume it was determining on how it was dealing with tide and current and weather at the time.
As you pointed out, Bob, right at the start of our conversation here, this is still at this point a search and rescue operation. There were a number of workers on that bridge. It sounds like 8 workers on the bridge, 6 are still missing. Talk to us a little bit about how you're thinking about those workers, those construction workers who were on the bridge at the time.
Well, again, I think the Mayday call probably saved lives, that everyone was aware of what was happening. And again, I'm a former chief engineer and a seaman. I've been at sea, so it's a dangerous job that you take on, and the fact that the guys were working late at night is disturbing. I mean, that's the biggest thing that we look for in the 40 years that I've been doing this, is to try to make sure that there's no loss of life, every day when we're at sea or when we're working in the port. So, the fact that it's still a search and rescue mission is good news. We deal with what happens if someone does end up in the water at these temperatures. There's a limited time to be able to get, them to rescue. But the fact that search and rescue is still going on board, and the United States Coast Guard is well known to be able to complete operations like this, and we understand there's some new sonar out there that's trying to look for some of the cars that came off the bridge. So we're looking at their families and the people that are involved to try to get them saved, and hopefully we'll get some better news on that later this afternoon.
And Bob, a moment ago you mentioned Synergy, and of course it's Synergy Marine Group that manages the ship. As you pointed out, it's a Singapore flagship. Talk to us a little bit about Synergy, its reputation around the world, and would that factor into this, the potential that maybe the crew just weren't as familiar with this harbor, or in your view, is that not a factor?
In shipping, and sometimes it's difficult for a normal citizen to understand what's happening around the world with shipping, but all of that crew is certified, by Singapore. They are well trained, they're vetted. Maersk was the operator, well-known company operating many ships around the world. It was an Indian crew, from what we understand. Synergy has a good reputation as a technical manager out of Singapore. And, we would assume, at a first look at this, that the ship, the crew was more than capable of operating the ship. And the fact that a Mayday call, was made was everyone had kept their heads and was trying to do their best to reduce the amount of the accident that occurred. Also understand that, several things happen here in shipping, and the Coast Guard is involved here in the state. We have what's called port state control, where the ships are inspected as they come into different ports in different areas of the world. Deficiencies may be found, and the deficiencies have to be corrected before the ship can depart the port. And we also know the builder of the ship out of Hyundai. So we would assume also that it was a well-built vessel. It's been operating since around 2015, 2016. So, it doesn't look like at this point in time that there was, negligence, and we haven't been on board the ship, and NTSB will complete a complete inspection. But the people that are involved, we would consider to be very capable of operating the vessel.
Bob, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you for this. I do want to ask you, though, because, of course, this is going to resonate with you a little bit differently than most people, because you actually have 6 ships out at sea yourself right now. How do you plan to talk with your colleagues, with your workers, about what has happened here? Certainly, this is going to resonate with them in a much different way than it might the average person.
So I oversee, I've overseen as many as 20 ships. We have 6 ships that are at sea right now, chemical carriers, with a company called Sterling Ocean, where our technical manager is fleet management out of Hong Kong, and they know the Synergy Group. It's a very small community, and we take all of this very seriously. I was notified early in the morning that there was a navigational issue in Baltimore, so that we get that message out to the ships on anyone that may be transiting or heading towards that port. And, the concern of life, the concern of what the accident may be, we'll look at the root cause analysis. We'll go out and we'll debrief our crew and talk to them about what may have happened, whether it was a fuel issue or a maintenance issue or whatever is the determination by the Coast Guard and NTSB. But there'll be many reports on how it happened and what could be changed in order for it not to happen again. That's what shipping is all about. We really do take it seriously. I'm on 24 hours a day, 7 days of notice, and my crews know that if they have a problem, I'll pick up the phone. So it's very important for us to make sure that we understand what happened here and follow it, through to the root cause analysis.
And finally here, Bob, as we look at these just incredible images, they're so devastating, of course, all this twisted metal, what's left of that bridge there on top of that cargo ship. How do you think officials will even begin to remove that ship now that it is sitting here in the Baltimore harbor? What do you envision that process might look like to actually get this ship out of that area and get the parts of this bridge off from on top of it?
Well, I'm actually heading down to Baltimore. And what we assume what would happen is there's a couple military sea lift command ships that are in the port, other ships that are looking at trying to get back on their schedule. I understand some heavy lift cranes are being maneuvered into the port a few days away. So I think what will happen is they'll try to, number one, start with clearing any of the remains of the bridge in the harbor area so that ships can transit. There'll be Coast Guard oversight on tugboats escorting boats when we can find out that damage has been cleared. The vessel that's right now that was part of the collision will remain in port for the investigation and for NTSB to do all of its inspections. And then at some point in time will either be brought to a shipyard for the damages and to remove the steel that's on board there, or one of the heavy lift cranes that'll be brought in on a barge will remove it. So the big thing here is from a commercial standpoint is to clear the damage and get the port open again. Replacing the bridge will become a whole nother discussion.
Best guess on timeline? Days, weeks, months for getting that ship out of the way there?
Yeah, I've been doing this for a long time. I would say you're talking days. Things will move very quickly once search and rescue, is over. Again, back hoping that we find the six, but once that determination, reaches a certain level, then the rest of the clearing of the port will take place. I would say, days. Within the week, you'll hear of actions being taken.
Bob, I can't thank you enough for your time, for all of this information. It is so, so helpful to us and to all of our viewers as we try and understand what it is that has happened and, of course, the impact, not just for Baltimore, but for the state of Maryland, for the country, for the U.S., and then, of course, for supply chains around the world, understanding what's happened here. We really thank you for your time today.
Well, we really appreciate CBC reaching out to us to be able to understand what we go through on a daily basis. But thank you very much for reaching out.
Thank you. Bob Kunkel, he's the president of Alternative Marine Technologies.